excited to be here. We are beginning a brand new series. I'm looking forward to it. I know I say that like every series. In fact, if I didn't say it every series, you should be nervous. You'd be like, oh, here's a series he's not looking forward to at all. Then we're all doomed, right? But I'm really looking forward to this series. Summer Mixtape, and the tagline is pretty cool too. Deep cuts from the Psalms. Let me explain to you a little bit. This may be foreign terminology for some of you. In fact, some of you, you're like, what is that thing up there? This is called a cassette tape. All right, you kids, you don't know what this is, but your parents, they do, right? So we're doing this series called Summer Mixtape. So I thought I'd walk us through it. Summer, that's the season that we're in right now. Okay, you noticed that when you got up this morning, it's like, wow, it's already pretty warm out. We have, as Western New Yorkers, we usually have 2 or 3 days of summer, maybe 5. We might get 2 months, but summer is what happens between, winter and winter. So it is summer, a mixtape. Some of you are like, I don't know what a mixtape is. This is a tape, once again. It's a cassette tape. A mixtape is when you would take some of your favorite songs and you'd make this homemade compilation, depending on how you want to say that, of some of these songs. And oftentimes, these songs had different themes to them, right? So how many of you know what I'm talking about? Right? Sometimes it was love songs, right? And you give them to your girlfriend or your boyfriend. It's like, hey, I made you a mixtape, right? I've been thinking of you. Here's a mixtape, right? Sometimes it was that. Sometimes it was like workout songs, like, hey, I'm going to the gym and I want some songs, and I don't want to look like a pansy here. So you'd have some workout songs, or maybe you'd have some traveling music. How many of you had some traveling music? It's like, hey, we're going on a road trip. Let's get the road trip mixtape. These are some songs we want to listen to. They're fun to sing along with. Everybody can kind of participate. So that's what a mixtape is. It's a collection of some of your favorite songs, usually around a theme, and you put them all together on this homemade cassette tape. All right, pretty awesome. We should probably bring those things back, right? So that's what a mixtape is. Now, maybe you're not familiar with this part up at the top. It says deep cuts from the Psalms. Deep cuts from the Psalms. What does that mean? Well, a cut is basically it's a song. It's a track on a song. We're going to go back even further than this. There were records before these things. Records, if you don't know what those are like a giant CD. And before they were like this, they were actually a little bit smaller, but a lot thicker. All right. So we had some of those in my house. These cuts were these grooves in the track, or these grooves in the record. So a cut is basically just a song. A deep cut is a lesser-known song. It wasn't the popular ones that everybody heard on the radio. Okay, it wasn't commercialized quite as much as all the other songs. So a deep cut was one that was usually, they didn't start off an album with their worst song, right? Because otherwise you'd be like, I don't like this band. I don't like this group. So it would be a little bit further on. It's like, it's not one of our best. And people aren't going to be singing this one probably so much. So they're going to put it a little bit later on in the album. So we're looking at some of the, not some of the worst psalms. Don't get me wrong here. It's like, well, this one just barely made it. Not like that. But we're looking at some of the psalms in the Bible that are a little lesser known. So we're not going to talk about Psalm 23 in this series. That would be like an example of a single, right? I mean, that would be one that everybody knows that song. All right, so we're going to look lesser known for the most part, some of the lesser known psalms, and I'm sure we're going to get to one you're like, oh, that's my favorite one. So that's a deep cut. Don't judge us, okay? We're doing our best here. We only had 150 psalms to pick from for these 8 weeks, so that was a challenge in itself. So we're going to be looking at some of these psalms, and a psalm, in case you didn't know what a psalm was, a psalm is a book in the Bible that's a collection of ancient songs and poetry. So we're going to look at some of these in the Bible. And just so you know, the Bible isn't just a book. It's a collection of books. In fact, it's a collection of 66 books written by over 40 different authors over a span of 1,500 years. So it's an amazing piece of literature. And in this literature, there are several different genres or writing styles represented throughout all of Scripture. In fact, you've got books of history, such as Genesis and Exodus and Joshua and many others. They're just books of history. You have books of law, such as Leviticus and Deuteronomy. You have wisdom literature, such as Proverbs and Job and Ecclesiastes. Then you have narrative books that kind of just tell a story. They're kind of biographical in nature, like Ruth and Esther. And really, the Gospels are narratives. They're the biography of Jesus, okay? Then you have epistles. We've talked about this recently. An epistle is a letter. In fact, there's 21 letters in the New Testament, written by guys like Peter and Paul. And they were letters written to various churches and different individuals. Then you have books of prophecy, such as, pretty much in the Old Testament, Isaiah through Malachi, or Malachi if you're Italian, but it's, so Isaiah through Malachi, and then the book of Revelation, is a book of prophecy. But then you also have books of poetry. You have Song of Solomon, and Lamentations, and Psalms. And that's what we're going to be looking at in this series, Psalms. In fact, many of the Psalms that were written were actually set to music, and they could have been sung. Of course, sometimes poetry doesn't always translate well when you're trying to translate from one language to another. So sometimes it can be difficult, or it would be difficult for us to sing some of these songs, because it kind of loses some of that musical flow that we kind of depend on when you're singing a song. Right? If there's no flow to it, if things don't rhyme and things, and analogies and metaphors don't kind of fit, it doesn't make for a very good song for us to sing. However, even today, there are many verses and many phrases in the Psalms that we are familiar with because they appear in our songs. So actually, in this series, we're going to do a little bit more singing. There's going to be a few more songs that we'll do. And one of the other cool things about this series, for the next 2 months, we put together a reading plan that will help guide you through this incredible book of the Psalms. In fact, there should be some bookmarks out at the information desk. Rita's got one. Okay, well, I see 2. Do I see 3? 4? 5? Those are going to be lousy fans, just so you know. They're not very big. You're going to need a bunch of them. So there's reading plans for you to kind of guide you through the Psalms over the next couple months. So that'll be something that you want to grab. If you haven't grabbed one already, it'll be very helpful. And here's what you're going to find, is as you're reading through the Psalms, you're going to come across some phrases or some verses, and perhaps even a whole psalm that you're like, hey, I think I've sung that before. Hey, I think I've heard that before. That's because it came from the Psalms. And you're going to be like, oh, well, that's where that came from. That's where that phrase came from. So that's pretty cool, right? In fact, oftentimes psalms and worship go hand in hand. There are so many psalms that are just a song of heartfelt worship, and that's for a couple reasons. One, the psalms by nature are very artistic in nature, right? So they already have this song nature built into it, but also one of the things that you'll discover in the psalms is that they're just filled with so much truth and emotion. And we know that the songs are so emotional, right? Sometimes somebody can say the certain words to you, but as soon as you hear in that song, it's like, oh, now it makes sense. That's why we made the mixtapes, right? Because we wanted to win somebody over with music because our words weren't that great. So we're like, well, this is how I really feel, right? And so there's so much emotion and truth in the Psalms. And really, the Psalms remind us of the glory and greatness of God and of His faithfulness. And that's really what worship is all about. You see this connection between the Psalms and worship. In fact, this is the definition that we've used for worship for several years. Worship is my response to God for who He is and what He does. Worship is my response to God for who He is and what He does. It's a response. When you recognize the glory and greatness of God, you don't just be like, oh, that's cool. There should be a response to that. So worship is that response. To what? It's to God. For who He is. His attributes, His character. The things that we sing about. His love, His grace, His mercy, all of those things. For who He is, and then also what He does. How we see God intervening in our life. How we see Him answering prayer. How we see even in the beauty of creation. We look out and we're like, man, God has done some amazing, amazing things. He's such an incredible creative artist. And that results in worship. We respond to God. In fact, today we're going to look at a verse. We're going to look at 6 verses, actually. And the last verse that we're going to look at in Psalms is Psalm 13:6. Psalm 13:6 says this. It says, I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. It's awesome, right? So singing, that's the response. So worship is my response to God for who he is and what he does. What has he done? He's been so good to us. Right? He is a good Father. He is perfect in all of his ways, even when, as Brody said, even when he doesn't feel like it's perfect. Even when things don't seem to make sense. And we're going to look at some of that today. Worship is my response to God for who he is and what he does. Now, one of the reasons why I think that we're drawn to the Psalms, and oftentimes we go to the Psalms when we're feeling discouraged, when we need a pick-me-up, when we're like, man, I'm just kind of struggling. Oftentimes, Psalms is one of those books that we go to, and one of the reasons why I think that we're drawn to the Psalms is because they represent the realities of life, right? They represent life's experiences and things that we face all the time. There's something about the Psalms that are just kind of authentic. They're raw. They're real, and there's so many things that we can relate to when we read the Psalms. In fact, sometimes they're so raw and authentic. I don't know about you, but there have been times where I've read things that David has said, and I'm like, is he allowed to say that? Like, I wish my enemies would fall off a cliff. We've thought that, but we never thought it was Scripture when we were thinking it, right? So when you read through the Psalms, you're like, is he allowed to say that? Is he allowed to think that? Is he allowed to, express himself to God that way? And so we're gonna read some of that. That'll be fun, right? So there's so many emotions in the Psalms that we can relate to. You have good ones, you have bad ones, you have times where there's love, and then there's anger, and there's justice, and betrayal, and jealousy. All of those things are represented in the Psalms, as well as worship and gratitude and blessing. So there's just something so down to earth about the Psalms that we can relate to. And we find them so encouraging because we kind of wrestle with all of these types of emotions in life. And in fact, I've discovered, even preparing for this series, that this is a series for me, which is always helpful, because I don't know about you, but I go through periods of discouragement where things don't turn out the way that I expected. I know I need guidance, and I need wisdom. Sometimes I need a kick in the pants. I need somebody to say, hey, suck it up, your life's not so bad. There are people that have had it so much worse than you. And sometimes I need that. So we're going to look at some of that in this series. And I trust that as we look at some of these deep cuts, some of these songs that maybe you're not quite as familiar with, that you'll be encouraged by them. And that you'll have this feeling that, one, I'm not alone, and two, God still loves me. All right? So go ahead and turn to Psalm chapter 13. Psalm 13, kind of a long introduction as we introduce this whole series. Psalm 13. That's page 436 if you're using one of our Bibles. If you don't have a Bible, feel free to take that one home with you. Page 436, Psalm 13. Now, many, not all, but many of the Psalms that we're going to look at were written by David. So I thought it would be interesting for us just to kind of give us a spotlight as to who David was. David was notable for a couple things. I think that the thing he was most notable for was killing Goliath. You've heard about that, right? In fact, we talk about it's a real David and Goliath story. It's kind of like the phrase that we use when we describe an underdog even in sporting events. So he killed Goliath. Here's another one that he's notably known for, a good one. He was a great king. He was arguably Israel's greatest king. He was a man after God's own heart, and God blessed his efforts. So he was a great king. Now, those are some wonderful things. There's some things that maybe you're not quite as familiar with that you need to know about David kind of before we go into this. One, he was an adulterer. That kind of doesn't fit with these couple good things there. He committed adultery, and then to cover it up, he committed murder. So that's not a good thing. You also need to know that David, he failed oftentimes in parenting. He had some real struggles in there. In fact, you find that some of his kids didn't like him very much. In fact, they wanted him dead. Okay, so that's kind of going against him. He also struggled with anxiety and depression, we believe. There's a lot of things that were a part of David that made him who he is, and who he was. So you kind of put all these things together. He also had a lot of enemies. I don't know if I mentioned that yet. He had a lot of enemies, and we'll talk about that later on today and throughout the series from time to time. So there were so many things that David struggled with and wrestled with. And even though he had some incredible highlights in his life and some incredible successes, there are also times where he went through some deep, deep discouragement. So, in fact, I heard recently, and I didn't check this out, but I heard recently that like 2/3 of the Psalms are Psalms of lament, where there's things where he's just going through that are discouraging. They don't all end that way, as we'll see today. But, so, we're going to notice some of these things in the Psalms, and one of the things that we'll notice in today, and you'll notice in your reading, is that oftentimes David will start out his psalm or his song with just being incredibly discouraged. Life has got him down, and he's so discouraged, but by the end of the song, his tune changes. And something happens in there that changes the way he's viewing his circumstances, which once again is one of the reasons why we're drawn to the Psalms, because we can identify with them. So today we're going to look at Psalm 13, and this is an example of this. And so Psalm 13, verse 1 says this: "How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts, and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him. And my foes will rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me." You see those two parts to this? The first 2/3 of David's psalm starts out with David in distress. In keeping with the cassette tape theme, we're going to look at side A and side B in today's talk. Okay, so side A, David is starting out in distress. Things aren't going well. And if you were to label this side, how would I label this side? Distress. Things aren't going well. And he lists several things that he's discouraged and distressed about in the first 2/3 of this psalm. The first one is this. The first track, we're going to look at some tracks, okay? You know what those are, right? Songs. The first track is this. It's a track of abandonment. He's feeling abandoned. He's struggling with this. He has this feeling of abandonment. Track number 1, abandonment. In fact, this is what he says, verse 1. He says, "How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me?" So he's feeling forsaken. He's feeling abandoned. In fact, 4 times in this first 2/3 of the chapter, he says, "How long? How long?" You ever wrestle with that? Anybody? How long am I going to go through this? 3 of you? Okay, really? Okay. You got pretty good lives, right? You know, how long am I going to struggle with this? How long is this going to plague me? How long am I going to feel this way? How long? You know, it's been said, time flies when you're having fun, right? And that's so true. Time flies when you're having fun. But when things aren't good, it seems to drag on and on. It's kind of like summertime, right? If you love summer, summer goes by so quick, and then winter is here forever. Right? It feels that way. Has this been, you know, we say that, I think, every year. I think this has been the coldest winter ever. You know, we say that every year. This has been the longest, it's been a long winter. You know, we're never like, as Western New Yorkers, we're never like, man, it was such a short winter. And here we are, it's spring and summer already. No, it's always a long winter. You know, remember Narnia? It's like always winter and never Christmas. You know? So here he is. He's like, how long is this going to be like this? How long am I going to have this feeling of abandonment? And he's talking to God here. He's saying, God, I feel like you've forgotten me. I feel like I've been forsaken by you. That you've turned your face away from me. David knows what that feels like. Remember, also, just go back a couple series that we looked at, Red Letter Day. Remember when Jesus said, my God, why have you forsaken me? There's that feeling that, man, I feel like I've been abandoned. And perhaps he's struggling with loneliness and isolation. We're not sure. But we do know that he is feeling ignored and forgotten by God. You ever feel that way? God, when is this season going to be over? Because I feel like you've forgotten me. This is why we can relate to the Psalms. Track 1 is abandonment. Track 2 is discouragement. Discouragement. He says, how long must I wrestle with my thoughts, and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? He's just so discouraged. So discouraged. I think Pastor Wood, the previous pastor here, used to say he was lower than a snake's belly. I don't know if you ever heard that expression. I think he used to say that, didn't he? Yeah, it's just like lower than a snake's belly. He's just so discouraged. He's struggling with this. Perhaps he's in a season of depression where all he has is these thoughts running through his mind over and over again. He says, every day I wrestle with my thoughts. I wrestle with my sorrow. I wrestle with my enemies. I have all of this negativity just kind of going through my mind. And he's just so distressed about life. You ever get hung up on some of the negative things that happen in your life? Does that ever happen to us? How many of you, let's just be honest, okay? We're in church, right? How many of you would say that you can have so many awesome things going on in your life, but then there's that one negative thing, and that kind of drags you down? Anybody? Yeah, that's all of us. I mean, we tend to focus on the negative oftentimes. It's so easy to happen. I know that happens to me in church, Things are going awesome, people's lives are being changed, God is saving people, and there's just incredible things going on, but then you hear that one negative thing, it's like, man, this job stinks. It's like, what is up with that? We have these types of things that go on in our lives. And David is just so distressed with life. There he is thinking and thinking and thinking. He's wrestling with his thoughts. In those seasons of discouragement, I know that's something that I sometimes struggle with. For me, I spend a lot of time alone, okay? And so I'm by myself, I'm preparing, messages. So there's a lot of time where I'm not interacting with other people. So sometimes those thoughts kind of just creep in. And you have these thoughts, times of discouragement. Your thoughts just kind of run all over the place. And I hear voices in my head. Not like, don't be worried about me, voices in my head. Not like that. But just these thoughts, you're like, where did that come from? And perhaps you can identify with some of these things. You hear these things like, you're worthless. You're a fraud. You don't have what it takes. You've messed up. God is mad at you. You've missed that opportunity. You're unlovable. You're a failure. And you wrestle with these thoughts. And it brings us down. We get so discouraged as we have all of these negative thoughts. And we can get hung up on those thoughts. Well, if you've ever struggled with some of those feelings and some of those thoughts, you're in good company. David said, man, I wrestle with these thoughts. How long am I going to have to put up with this? Track number 3 is uncertainty. Uncertainty. Verse 3 says, look on me and answer me, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. Meaning, I might as well be dead and buried. This is the way it's going to be. He's struggling with uncertainty. He longs to be rescued. In fact, what does he say here? He says, look on me and answer me. In other words, God, you see what I'm going through. Why don't you do something about it? We've all been there, right? Where we wrestle with, God, okay, if you're so perfect in all your ways, how come it doesn't seem perfect here? You clearly see what's going on. Look on me and answer me. You see the things I'm struggling with. And yet it seems like there's no hope. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. How long do I have to go through this? Perhaps he's wrestling with this feeling of God not answering his prayers. Answer me, God. I've been praying, but you're not answering me. And we've all felt that way. By the way, real quick, this is a side sermon. God answers all of our prayers. Okay, you need to know this. Sometimes we say, this is just an unanswered prayer. That's not true. See, God answers our prayers in one of 4 ways. If you want to write down, you're welcome to. If not, that's fine too. He answers with yes, no, wait, or my grace is sufficient for you. Those are the 4 ways God answers our prayers. Every single one of our prayers is answered. The problem for us is we interpret no, wait, and my grace is sufficient. We interpret all of those as no. God didn't answer my prayers. God didn't give me what I wanted. But God answers all of our prayers. Sometimes we need to wrestle through them. But God answers our prayers. And here David is like, answer me. Why don't you just show me? Why don't you give me the direction? And he's struggling with this uncertainty. In fact, he says, give light to my eyes. You know what he's saying there? Give light to my eyes. He's saying, God, help me to see what I cannot see. Help me to see things clearly. God, give me your perspective on this situation. God, give me wisdom. Give me discernment. I can't see clearly. I have blind spots. There's things I can't see. I don't have heaven's perspective. We talk about this once in a while when we look at the Lord's Prayer, right? Our Father who art in heaven, or who is in heaven, we're saying, God, you have all of heaven's perspective. You have all of heaven's resources. So naturally, I'm going to go to you for strength, for wisdom. And he's saying, God, give light to my eyes. Give me divine wisdom and perspective on my situation. Track number 4 is this, enemies. Enemies. Verse 4 says, and my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. And unfortunately, David has a lot of enemies. He has a lot of enemies. He spent a chunk of time hiding and afraid for his life. In fact, when we read these Psalms, we're like, I think he was depressed, and he was discouraged. Maybe he had anxiety and depression. Listen, if you were hiding out in a cave because somebody was going to kill you, you would probably be a little bit anxious as well. Right? And so that's kind of how things were for him. His predecessor, King Saul, was jealous of him, and he wanted to kill him. At least one of his sons wanted him dead. Okay? David had been betrayed also by some of his close friends. He writes about it in his Psalms, in his journal, so to speak. His diary, if you will. Right? So he writes about these things of being betrayed and feeling abandoned and forsaken, even by his friends. So he has all of these enemies. Frequently, David talks about his enemies, and he wants them dead. Okay? I'm telling you, when you read these things, sometimes you question, really? He's a man after God's own heart? And yet he had these emotions, he had these feelings? And perhaps you can relate to some of these types of enemies. Certainly not all of them. Probably none of us have been afraid for our life. I got this guy at work. I think he wants to kill me. So I'm not coming out of my cubicle today. We probably don't have that. We don't wrestle with those types of enemies. But we all have some people that we don't like as much. We wouldn't say that I hate that person. Maybe we would say that. But maybe we don't have these types of enemies, but we all have enemies. We all have enemies. They're not all physical enemies. It could be an emotional enemy. It could be a spiritual enemy. It could be a sin issue that is your enemy, that is actively fighting against you. It could be Satan. Satan, and here's the thing, Satan doesn't just want to trip you up. He wants to keep you down as well. In fact, Satan will bait the trap and then mock you for taking the bait. That's how wonderful a guy he is, right? Not so much. So David, he's got a lot going on in this text. We should close in prayer, right? This is just so discouraging. You read this like, really? How'd this make it in the Bible? This is so incredibly discouraging. His life has been awful. Side A, if you will, is pretty depressing, right? He's got this abandonment that he's struggling with, and discouragement and uncertainty and enemies. It's turning out to be a lousy album altogether. No one would ever want to listen to this song. Sounds like a country song. Whoops, we should probably move on. That's not in the notes. So that's side A. What about side B? Listen to side B of this album. This is verses 5 and 6. He says, but despite all of this, he says, but I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. Don't you love how he turns this thing around? Love this. Side B is the turning point in the psalm. Side B starts out with this contrasting word, but. All of this nonsense, all of these things I've been wrestling with, and he's pouring his heart out, all of these things. But, however, that's not the end of my song. The song doesn't finish just yet. He says, but I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise. Why? For he has been good to me. Side B is a song of deliverance. Deliverance. And once again, you'll see this all throughout the Psalms. It starts out with distress and ends with deliverance. Distress, deliverance. Once again, this is why we can relate to the Psalms. It starts out with distress, and we need to be reminded of God's deliverance that he brings us. We're so thankful for side B. In fact, in this final third of Psalm 13, David focuses on these three incredible attributes of God. We'll move through them relatively quickly. Track number one is this, God's love. Track number one is God's love. Verse 5, he says, but I trust in your unfailing love. You know what he's saying? Your unfailing love? He's saying that your love is trustworthy. It's trustworthy. It doesn't fail. You ever just stop and think about how much God loves us? You know, next time you're feeling discouraged, think about how much God really loves us. And the reality that his love for us is unfailing. It's unfailing. It really is remarkable. His love is unfailing. See, in this life, in our lives, in the relationships that we encounter, even the people that love us still fail from time to time, right? We fail. The ones that we love from time to time. But that's not true with God. His love is unfailing. God's love for us is unconditional. There's another way of kind of looking at that. It's unconditional. Now, we struggle with this. We struggle even understanding unconditional love because we are so inundated by conditional love. I'll love you as long as, and then you fill in the blank. I'll love you in these circumstances. I'll love you as long as you do this. Love you as long as you perform. I'll love you as long as I don't find something else or find somebody else. I will love you conditionally. That's what we struggle with. And I think what sometimes happens is we project our conditional love onto God. And we project this image on God because we struggle with unconditional love. God must be like that too. God must have conditions on his love. I have a newsflash for you. Ready for it? God's not created in our image. We're created in his image. All of the wonderful attributes that we see and experience and feel, those are from God. And it's just, even in that, it's just a pale representation of the perfection of God. But all of our negative attributes, those don't come from him at all. That's all on us. So we can't project our insufficiencies and our deficiencies and our conditional moodiness or whatever it is. We can't project that onto God. God's love is unfailing. It's trustworthy. Track number 2 is God's salvation. God's salvation, he says this in verse 5, he says, my heart rejoices in your salvation. Amen. My heart rejoices in your salvation. You know, that really is something to rejoice about, isn't it? When you think about how God has saved us and how God has delivered us. Listen, if you're a follower of Jesus, your heart has something incredible to rejoice about. You have been delivered. And whether you know it or not, you've been set free from not only the penalty of sin, which is death and hell. You've been set free from that penalty. That's something to rejoice about, right? And you've also been set free from the power of sin. That God has given us a choice that when we follow Him, we can follow Him because of the salvation that He has provided for us, that He has delivered us from the power of sin and the penalty of sin. We have so much to rejoice about in our salvation. So when we think about worship as my response to God for who He is, what He does, His deliverance of us, the salvation that He has offered us, is an incredible reason to rejoice and to worship and to respond to God for what He's done. The third track is this: God's goodness. God's goodness. You see this in verse 13:6. He says, I will sing the Lord's praise. Why? For He has been good to me. God has been so good to me. You know, when was the last time you thought about God's goodness? When was the last time you thanked God for His goodness? You know, this ought to be a reoccurring psalm or song in our lives on a daily basis. In fact, according to this text, he says, I will sing the Lord's praise, for He has been good to me. So the result of acknowledging God's goodness is that we should sing to Him. This is one of the reasons why singing and music and what sometimes we refer to as worship, even though singing and music is just one element of worship. This is why it is such a big deal in the church. And I've mentioned this before. How many other organizations that you're aware of have singing as one of the main functions that they do at their meetings? I mean, they may sing a song here and there. It may be the same song every time. But for us, as followers of Christ, singing is like this anthem that resonates in our churches. And it's because of this. We should sing to God. And some of you are thinking, well, I just don't have a very good voice. And we would agree. However, I wrote this down. You might want to write this down. In fact, you may want to quote me on this. You don't have to have a great voice to worship. You just need a great God to worship. You don't have to have a great voice to worship. You just have to have a great God to worship. We have such an incredible God. Incredible. So how has God been good to you? What are you thankful for? How has God been good to you? You know, honestly, if we went back to verse 5 and just looked at God's love and God's salvation, if those were the only two things that we had going for us, that would be good enough. Wouldn't you agree? His love and His salvation. But wait, there's more. Sounds like an infomercial, right? But wait, there's more. It's not just God's love and His salvation. There's so much more that God gives us that remind us of His goodness. How about this one? How about a fresh start? A fresh start. And I'm not just talking about just that salvation. I'm talking about every single day. That God's mercy is new every morning. Great is His faithfulness. That we get a fresh start. What about the fact that you have purpose and meaning in life? That is because of God's goodness. That we don't just wander through life aimlessly. That God has given us a task and a mission. What about the fact that we live in a beautiful world? And not just a beautiful world, but specifically us. We live in a beautiful part of the world. It's incredible when you look at it. I mean, we see rainbows, we see trees. You know, I took a picture of a doe with two fawns in my backyard the other night. I've got bears on my trail camera. It's wonderful, right? We live in an incredible part of the country. There's so many things that we can just look out and just marvel at what God has done. Not only do we have a beautiful world, but we have God's Word. I mean, that is fantastic. You know, you are so blessed. You know, I've been looking at Bibles. I've been trying to help a friend of mine find a Bible, and I looked at my Bibles the other day and I'm like, hey, I counted 23 in my office, and I'm like, I'm sure that's not all of them. I mean, we have God's Word. That is so incredible. So much to be thankful for. We have peace and contentment. Can't put a price tag on that. We see people all the time that have all sorts of money and wealth and power and fame, and yet they don't have peace. They don't have contentment. We're blessed to be a part of His church. Not just the church, but this church. We have this incredible faith community. We have an eternal future. We have so much to be thankful for when we think about God's goodness. God has been so, so, so good to us. These 3 tracks on side B are way better than the 4 tracks on side A, aren't they? Aren't you so thankful for side B? Side B is amazing. You know, I pulled something out of my garage. It's kind of a relic. I don't know if you did. That's right. I don't have 4AA or 4D batteries in here. Otherwise, I'd blast you out of this room with this incredible thing. But kids, this is called a tape player. There is no room for CDs on here. There's nothing. In fact, here's the thing about this. Okay, there's actually tapes in here too, just so you know. So if you're listening to an album and you're like, I don't really like this, you can take this thing out. I know, it's crazy. Watch this. Flip it, and put it back in, and push play. It's not going to play because it's not plugged in. All right? Isn't that incredible? How you can take that out and you can flip it over and you can listen to the other side. It's just so incredible. You know, here's my encouragement. Here's my encouragement for us today. You know, we can get so focused on side A. The discouragement, the uncertainty, the enemies, the stress, the whatever it is that we're facing, feeling like we're isolated and forgotten and abandoned. We can get so focused on all of those things and forget that there's a side B. And we can just keep playing side A over and over and over and over and over and over. And we have these feelings like David were like, how long? How long? And perhaps God is saying, how long are you going to listen to side A? How long? Would you get another song? Would you flip the tape over? Would you focus, rather than on all of those negative things, would you focus on my love? It's unfailing. Have you heard about it? One of the ways I demonstrated my love is I sent my son here and offered you salvation. You have so much to be thankful for. I'm a good Father. There's so much goodness that is in store for you if you would just trust in me. So rather than focusing on all of the negative things in life, and all of the discouragement, and all of the pain, and all of the things that we can kind of get bogged down by, in the midst of our good lives that we have, rather than focusing on all that negative, we need to turn the tape over, listen to the other songs, and be reminded of how much God loves us and how incredible He is to us. So this week, doesn't matter what you're going through. I know we go through some tough stuff, don't we? I know. But no matter what you go through, take some time to sing of God's love. It's unfailing. It's trustworthy. Take some time to give thanks to God for His salvation. You have been delivered from the penalty and the power of sin if you have a relationship with Christ. And then remember God's goodness. God has been so good to us. Don't get stuck on side A. Flip the tape and play side B. And as you're playing side B, sing with all of your heart to God. Perhaps your song will go something like David's, when he went from distress to deliverance. When he says these words, Psalm 13, 1 through 6, how long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death, and my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. But flip the tape. Listen to the other side. I will trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for He has been good to me.